your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News Weekend Edition.
Hello, I'm Naveen Day. Thanks for joining us for a look at what made headlines this week across the country. Canada Post employees went on strike Friday morning after failing to reach a negotiated agreement with their employer. According to the Canadian Union of Postal Workers, approximately 55,000 workers are on the picket lines, claiming little has transpired with the Crown Corporation at the bargaining table. James Ball is the acting president of CUP W Local 730, who joins us from Edmonton. He says one thing his group is fighting for is taking better care of our rural community through an expansion of services.
There are more post offices in Canada than there are Tim Hortons, and we're interested in expanding those services in those offices where companies like Co-op and banks and John Deere have all moved to larger centers, and all this infrastructure has basically collapsed. There's still a post office. So we want to bring banking back to these communities through the post office. We want to have community centers and hubs. We want to promote additional expansions to services that can really significantly affect our communities outside of the major cities. And I think that's a really big step. Bringing jobs and employment to these small communities, I think, is a really important step that Canada Post is neglecting to take.
Canada Post spokesperson Lisa Liu said in a statement Friday morning, mail and parcels will not be processed or delivered for the duration of the national strike, and some post offices will be closed. Service guarantees will be impacted for items already in the postal network. The federal labor minister's decision to step in and end labor disputes at ports in BC and Montreal is not sitting well with the unions involved. The union, representing around 1,200 Montreal dock workers, plans to seek court action over Stephen McKinnon's decision to move the talks to binding arbitration. He has also ordered the resumption of all operations at the ports. The union called the move a dark day for workers' rights. The union, representing locked-out port workers in BC, also says it will challenge the federal government's move amid a labor dispute involving more than 700 longshore supervisors halting some shipping traffic on the West Coast. McKinnon says the work stoppages have been impacting supply chains, thousands of jobs, and Canada's reputation as a reliable trading partner. So what does McKinnon's decision to move to binding arbitration mean for opening the ports back up? To talk more about this, Jeanette Roche sat down with our political reporter and Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilley. He also gave insight on what the recent U.S. federal election could mean for Canada's oil and gas sector.
Acting before the strike happens and ordering binding arbitration, which they could, isn't the Trudeau government's MO. And right now, Parliament's not sitting, so they couldn't do emergency back-to-work legislation. And even if Parliament were sitting, they can't do any government business because they're just debating the Green Slush Fund. So this was essentially the only move that they had with the ports. The Vancouver strike was entering its second week, and the Montreal one just started Sunday night. So, having both ports shut down, that would be a huge disadvantage to the Canadian economy. One, it would send goods that are destined for North America to alternative ports, whether it's Halifax in Canada or maybe to New York or Boston on the American East Coast, and then have the goods shipped in other ways. So we would lose out on that business, but also getting goods in and out of the country for businesses. Would stores have supplies for the busy Christmas shopping season, or would they be out of luck? Would our producers be able to get their goods to export markets? These are all the reasons that we needed to have this come to an end. But the Trudeau government, they acted faster than I thought. But thankfully, this will get the ports moving within a couple of days again.
Okay, turning our eyes now to south of the border and sort of how it affects us. Brian, the markets soared, and especially energy stocks got a bounce from Donald Trump winning the election. And the Canadian pipeline companies, TC Energy and Enbridge, both shot up. And there's even talk of reviving the Keystone XL pipeline. So while Trump might like the idea, is that something that the Trudeau government would allow?
I'm not clear on exactly what permits they might need to get. And we don't know for sure if TC Energy will go ahead with, Keystone XL. It has been a political football for since 2008. And of course, Trump approved it. They started moving forward. They got some construction done, not enough, and Biden shut it down. But the Trudeau guys are really not pro-pipeline. They supported Keystone XL before the Americans said no to it, but would they support it again now when they're making so many moves against the oil and gas industry? I really can't see that happening. They're bringing in their emissions caps. They're bringing in increasing the carbon tax, the just transition plan. All of that points to not supporting the oil and gas industry, which this pipeline would do. Yes, they bought Trans Mountain Pipeline. That's because they messed things up so badly. They also shut down Northern Gateway. They shut down the pipeline that would go to New Brunswick through Quebec because Quebec said, no, we don't want stinking pipelines here. So having them approve this again or cooperate on it is, we'll have to wait and see, but I would not bet on that.
Okay. And speaking of Donald Trump, he's promised to expand oil and gas activity in the United States and lift a ban on liquefied natural gas exports. Meanwhile, Canada is moving ahead with a cap on emissions, like you said, which the industry and Alberta Premier Danielle Smith call a cap on production. So are you getting any sense that the Trudeau government will walk away from the emissions cap idea?
Oh, smart people, including smart liberals, are saying they should. Bill Morneau, as former finance minister for Justin Trudeau, but also a guy who actually has run a business, said, you know what, this probably isn't the best time for moving forward with the emissions cap. But I don't see Stephen Guilbeault walking away from this. He is a green zealot. It is his religion. He has been this way for decades. Having him move away from this, I think he would quit the government and topple it rather than allow that to continue to pull back from that position. So I think that they're going to continue to go forward with it, which will increasingly put us at odds with American policy. Whether it's past liberal governments or conservative governments, they've often ended up trying to align policies with the Americans because it makes it easier for cross-border business. That's why Stephen Harper in 2008 said he was going to look at bringing in a cap and trade system. Why? Because Barack Obama was going to do it. Then Obama walked away from it, so we walked away from it federally. Trudeau, he's not built that way. He is not going to match the tax cuts and the assistance to expand oil and gas production that Donald Trump will do. So, I think you'll hear a giant sucking sound of investment flowing south from Canada down into the United States. TC Energy is going to do great. Enbridge is going to do great. Guess where a lot of their investments are now? The United States and Mexico.
And while Donald Trump wants to expand oil and gas activity in the U.S., federal conservative leader Pierre Poilievre brought his Axe the Tax message to a large rally in Castlegar, BC. Poilievre took to the social media platform X to say that the federal levy has not only been hurting the average everyday Canadian, but also a lot of business owners who have simply had enough and left Canada altogether for greener pastures in the U.S.
All of the jobs, the businesses, the truckers would have to leave this country. South of the border, they have zero carbon tax. Yeah, well, you know what? You can just imagine them popping the champagne at the Trump Tower in New York if Trudeau gets in with a 61 cent a liter carbon tax, because they'll know Donald Trump will be on the phone calling our trucking companies, our factories, our mining enterprises and saying, come down south, pay no carbon tax, we'll take your money and jobs and leave the poverty behind. Already, $500 billion Canadian investment dollars have left in the last decade to build mines, factories, businesses south of the border. Canadian investment dollars creating American jobs. My friends, I want our money back.
According to Lethbridge MP Rachel Thomas, the federal carbon tax is one of many factors that are making life unaffordable for Canadians. In this next interview with Hal Roberts, she squarely places the blame for rising costs and inflation on the Trudeau government's policies. Take a look.
We know that Canadians are worse off than they have been in at least 40 years. And of course, that's due to the government that's currently in place, led by Prime Minister Trudeau. Unfortunately, he's just made decisions to spend carelessly, and as a result, inflation has been driven up, interest rates have been driven up, and as a result, Canadians are paying more than ever before. I'm hearing from people who are coming into my office who, they're having to make difficult decisions between paying their utility bill or paying for food or properly feeding their families. Um, in terms of a conservative plan, our plan is really common sense. If you rein in the spending and you make sure that you're responsible, spending within your means only, then of course that reduces inflation. Further to that, we would be introducing a dollar for dollar rule. So if we're going to spend an extra dollar, then we have to find $1 of savings when we're in government. I think as well, we've made it very clear that we intend to scrap the carbon tax. That'll be our first order of business when we form government. And we know that this is costing Canadians, a ton of money. It's adding to their gas bill, their grocery bill, their utilities bill. Everything costs more because of the carbon tax. So, of course, we look forward to taking an axe to that and getting rid of it altogether for all time.
Yeah, let's talk a bit about that carbon tax for a moment here, Rachel. Many would argue that it has been very hurtful to a number of Canadians, from farmers to the truckers who deliver our food. In fact, a recent report by the Parliamentary Budget Officer also says that even with rebate checks that Ottawa was dishing out, overall Canadians are spending much more than we're actually getting back. Would you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, certainly. Again, that's, the PBO, the Parliamentary Budget Officer affirmed that Canadians are worse off with the carbon tax. We know that in the province of Alberta, after rebate, Albertans are still paying about $700 more for the carbon tax than they would be if we didn't have it. And so again, this is just another example where this government is out of touch with the reality of Canadians and actually putting policy in place that's incredibly punitive in nature. Canadians deserve better. Canadians deserve hope. They deserve prosperity. They deserve opportunity. And common sense conservatives are committed to doing that. And again, it starts with step one, which is to axe the carbon tax.
Now, here's a shocking statement. Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault has, quote, a deranged agenda against Alberta. That is according to Alberta Premier Danielle Smith when asked about the Trudeau government's plan of an emissions cap on the oil and gas sector. According to our legislative reporter and Alberta correspondent for the National Post, Tyler Dawson, the cap would apply across the country. But in this interview with BCN's Hal Roberts, he explains it would mainly impact Alberta and Saskatchewan.
Yeah, and that's just simply because most of the sort of oil and gas and mining production happens in those two provinces. There will be some effects on Newfoundland, for example, because they have an oil industry there as well, but it's primarily going to affect Alberta. The cap is still in draft form, so there could be some modification to that. Seems unlikely given the sort of vigor with which the federal Liberals have defended it over the past week. But what it would do basically is it would require oil producers to bring their emissions 35% lower than they were in 2019, and they would need to accomplish that by 2030, 2032. Little ways off yet, but the Alberta government is essentially arguing that an emissions cap is a de facto production cap. So the only way for the oil industry to make that target would be to cut back production, is what they're arguing. I guess we don't know yet if that's true, but that's certainly what the Alberta government is arguing. Now, the response to it is going to be interesting. Obviously, we have some sense of the war of words, Smith haranguing the federal government from sort of the bully pulpit, shall we say. But what are the actual mechanisms that can be used to resist this if they feel that's the road to go down? Well, the first, and it has more or less been promised, is some sort of motion under the Alberta Sovereignty Act, which would, well, we don't totally know what it would do. The best indication we have of this is that it just sort of means that Alberta's employees, whether that's public servants or Crown Corporation employees, wouldn't need to sort of help the implementation of this process. So Alberta would sort of take a step back, and if it's going to happen, we're not going to participate in it, so long as the law allows for that. So that's probably what that would do. The other option, of course, is a lawsuit. I would also probably expect the Alberta government to sue the federal government over this. Whether or not you can sue on a draft regulation, I think, is a bit of an open question. But certainly when there's final regulations, that might be an option for the Alberta government there. Bit of a mixed record fighting in court, the Alberta government over the last 5-6 years. So we'll see how that pans out if we go down that road. And of course, I mean, the other option here is there's a very good chance we're going to have a Conservative prime minister in the next year. So could just wait it out, because this is probably not a policy that a future Prime Minister, Pierre Poilievre, is going to keep.
Alberta Premier Danielle Smith stopped by Lethbridge alongside UCP candidate for Lethbridge West, John Middleton Hope, in anticipation of the soon-to-be-called by-election. The two spoke with the city's Chamber of Commerce to address key issues and answer concerns and questions from the Chamber. When asked about when Smith will officially call the by-election, Premier Smith said it's at the discretion of the official opposition leader, Naheed Nenshi, who has yet to have someone in his party step down so he can run in an NDP-friendly riding.
The by-election has to be called before January the 1st. So we have a bit of a window here. As I've mentioned before, I'm actually quite surprised that the leader of the official opposition has shown no interest in seeking a seat in the legislature. I understand he didn't want to run in Lethbridge West, but he had 37 other seats. And it's normally convention when somebody becomes leader that one of their colleagues steps aside for them so that they can get into the legislature. So I was genuinely waiting to see if anyone would do that. They have a few more days to be able to make that decision. And if they do, we'll call them both at the same time.
One of the most important things for the citizens of Lethbridge is to have strong, effective advocacy. And that's what I intend to bring to the table when I'm elected in Lethbridge West. I think it's critical that our citizens have those types of voices in the legislature. I'm already working with a number of ministers. We've already had a number of conversations about activities that will benefit the citizens of Lethbridge and the area. So I'll simply leverage those relationships. I'll be banging on their doors on a regular basis to get the resources that we need for the third largest city in the province of Alberta.
The Alberta government announced a new initiative officials say will speed up the home building process. Social Services Minister Jason Nixon says their focus is cutting more red tape and reducing delays that are slowing down housing construction.
The reality is in our province, housing starts are up 35% from last year. That's starts rising to 33,577 homes so far in this year. Housing starts from January to September 2024 compared to January to September 2023 have seen province-wide, as I said, increases of 35%, but in Edmonton increases of 47%, Calgary increases of 23%, in Lethbridge increases of 305%, and in Red Deer increases of 115%.
With more and more farmers retiring, the Alberta government says it is taking action to address the issue by attracting more young people to our agriculture industry. Minister of Agriculture and Irrigation R.J. Sigurdsson says more funding towards education in agriculture should help. He says it starts with a new investment in 4-H Alberta.
We've partnered with the federal government to invest more than $731,000 over 5 years in 4-H Alberta programs. This investment through the Sustainable Canadian Agricultural Partnership will allow 4-H Alberta to expand its Intro to 4-H program, which offers experience-based learning opportunities that build connections between urban and rural youth and local farmers and ranchers.
The Alberta government is looking to bring contractors on to restore land that was razed for fire guards during our busy wildfire season. The requests for proposals from the Forestry and Parks Ministry are for areas around Edson, west of Edmonton, High Level, and in the province's northwest. Fire guards are barriers that are meant to slow down a fire's spread. They are created by using heavy equipment to remove vegetation that could fuel the flames. The ministry says the restoration work aims to prevent soil erosion, stabilize the area, and encourage new growth. RCMP in Cochrane have arrested and charged a 47-year-old man in connection with human trafficking and other offenses dating back 20 years. Sergeant Matt Pumphrey says the investigation began when a woman came forward with a complaint last February.
In early February of this year, Cochrane RCMP initiated an investigation into potential sex trafficking. The complainant who came forward reported that she had been the victim of human and sex trafficking at the hands of a male she had met over an online dating site between the years 2004 and 2007 in Cochrane, Alberta. After a brief consensual relationship, the male began to traffic her online for monetary gain. The male exploited nude photos of the victim, placing them on an internet site where other males would then contact the site to arrange for sexual services. The male would then drive the victim to the arranged locations where he would wait and collect the money and then drive the victim to other appointments. Throughout this investigation that spanned 9 months, Cochrane RCMP General Investigation Section were able to identify other victims of this crime, and throughout their statements, we're able to corroborate the allegations against this male.
It was very significant to me to hear the details of this case and that they started so many years ago. It was about 20 years ago that my wife and I were first exposed to the issue of human trafficking through a documentary that we watched. At that time, most people didn't really realize that this was even happening. And there's an awakening happening in Alberta right now. People are starting to realize across the country that the issue of human trafficking is far more prevalent than data shows.
And officials at the Calgary Zoo are mourning the loss of a 2-year-old female lowland gorilla. Officials say the gorilla died after being injured when moving between back-of-house spaces at the zoo. An investigation is underway.
Her care team and our veterinary staff acted extremely quickly to save her, but Ayari subsequently passed away as a result of her injuries. An investigation will be undertaken, including necropsy, to understand what happened and any changes to processes or infrastructure that need to be made to prevent this from happening in the future. Ayari was born here at the zoo in 2022, the first offspring for Dam Dossie and sire Jasuri. Her passing will leave an immense hole in the hearts of our organization and our community.
So sad. Up next, stories from around southern Alberta. Don't go away. Being mentally healthy is a state that we should always look for in our surroundings. Anxiety, depression, and stress are on the list of factors that affect mental health and lead to mental illness. According to the Executive Director of Student Services at the University of Lethbridge, Mark Slomp, well-being is a state in which most areas of a person's life are good. Slomp explains how experiences as a child can impact a person's mental health as they age.
You know, childhood experiences. We know that adolescents have better mental health outcomes as adults if they've experienced warm, trusting relationships with their caregivers, you know, acceptance, love, security, those kinds of things. We know that that's the foundation for adult mental health. Definitely been an increase in child and adolescent mental health rates. We've seen that, you know, across the border, for example, with a public health advisory issued relative to child and adolescent mental health. And we see those trends in Canada also. So definitely increases in the last decade or more. So in terms of contributing factors for the higher rates of youth and adolescent mental health, some of it has to do with adverse childhood experiences, with early childhood experiences, because those things provide the foundation for adult mental health. Others have to do with social connection. We're becoming more and more socially disconnected, and that has an impact on youth and adolescent mental health as well. So there's many factors associated with this, but those are some.
According to Stats Canada, in 2022, more than 5 million Canadians experienced some form of mental health disorder. Good works are often noticed and recognized, especially those which have a great impact on our community. Such is the case with the Platinum Awards that Streets Alive mission received during the 2024 Community Votes campaign. The repurposed donation center from the Christian organization was recognized in both the community group and second-hand clothing and consignment categories. Streets Alive's Chief Operations Officer Cameron Kissick explains what winning this award means to them.
It shows the community support for our organization, not just
to get out there and actually vote for us in these areas is amazing. So with the Repurposed Centre, it is designed for individuals who are newly housed, perhaps newly to Canada, or just find themselves in a situation where they may have found lodging but cannot afford the basic household needs, utensils, pots, pans, furniture, beds, you name it. If you need it in your house, so we try to have it here, which also means if you need it in your house and you have extra, we would love to take your donations from you because we need them out. So it's designed for individuals to come get that.
Streets Alive mission also addresses the basic needs of people experiencing homelessness or addiction, including clothing, a warm or cool place to stay, and a fully licensed treatment facilities for men and women to help them overcome their addiction. Childhood and family are a fundamental pillar of a society not only in Lethbridge but around the world. YMCA Lethbridge is aware of this, and that is why it joins forces with YMCAs from other parts of the globe to provide and receive strategies that strengthen the institution for the benefit of the community. Christina Larkin, Director of Community Development, says trips they have made to Colombia and Kenya for the organization have been very beneficial.
Here at the YMCA of Lethbridge, our global initiatives include things like partnering with the YMCA of Bogota for things like mental health programs to help support the development of a youth culture where young people can support one another to reduce suicidal ideation, improve mental health, and improve the well-being of young people. So we're also able to support in emergencies. Because YMCAs are global, we also know that many people in YMCAs are struggling with things like climate disasters, violence, war, and we're able to support where we can. And so we're able to share ideas like, what are some good programs for mental health? What are some ways that you work with your governments? What are some ways that you work with your schools or policing agencies to improve outcomes for all ages of people? I was able to learn, wow, those are some great practices for me as a provider with newcomers who are coming here after experiencing war. They arrived to Canada, and now I'm able to learn from their own home countries, what are some culturally appropriate ways to support them.
The YMCA is located in over 120 countries and more than 12,000 locations around the world, providing wellness programs. Bill C-293, which is going through its second reading in the Senate, looks to address pandemic prevention and preparedness, but certain terminology has agricultural producers worried. Doug Roxburgh, Vice Chair of Alberta Beef Producers, explains after the break.